Namasre Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. So we were discussing the sutra number 35. I think we were discussing 35. Uh, yes. Sutra number 34, which was about pranayama, about how the prana acts on the mind as well as on the body, and how the process of perception, when we see certain things, when we hear certain things, it Swamiji clearly explained how it creates channels, how the nervous energy flows through the spinal cord to the brain and creates pathways or channels, as it were. It has been confirmed by modern neurology that these things happen. And when you see people are resistant to accept new ideas, they give it the name orthodoxy. They say, oh, he's an orthodox person, he doesn't want to change. Whatever ideas have been part of his personality for since childhood, he has become it has become a habit with him. So very often he doesn't want to change those habits. The resistance which a person shows, Swami Vivekananda points out that certain impressions are created, samskaras are created in the chitta, and it is a tendency of the human mind to resist any new channel. That is why we say that when the brain is young, that is less than 32 years, that's what Swami Brahmanand used to very often mention, ki spiritual practices have to be started when the person is young. But after 16, the brain starts developing very fast, and up to the age of 32 or even 40, the neurons, there is an increase. But after a certain age, it has been found that the nervous pathways in the brain, though there are millions of pathways possible even at an old age, even at an advanced age, but new pathways, to form new pathways, it takes a longer time if you grow old. I mean, at an older age, at an advanced age. That is why Swamiji says we have to convince or make these pathways when the brain is uh, almost susceptible to change. It should be able to take up new ideas. So with every fresh idea, Swamiji compares it to a cutting a channel in the mud or in the soil. When we cut channels, it becomes easy for the water to flow. So also the nerve currents, unless their channels are not clogged, not blocked by certain preconceived ideas, the practice of yoga, because it's an entirely new set of thoughts and motives. People have never been trained to think in the yogic way. If yoga was as normal as our education in the schools was, that everybody who was born was uh, taught these ideas about yoga, then it would have been natural and the children would grow with these yogic ideas. But unfortunately, people come to religion when they are uh, much older in age, when these grooves or this cutting of new channels in the brain, as it were, it is very difficult. And that is why Swamiji says there is so much of resistance to these new ideas of yoga. You tell a new person that the subtler is the three types of body, for example. It is very good as an idea, but for a person who is given to the materialistic interpretation of life, he will always convert everything in terms of body, in terms of material, at the most in the terms of energy or prana. So he understands that there are certain life forces which have to function properly if his body is to survive. But beyond that, the effect of the mind also, in some cases, the psychology has become so popular now that they understand that the mind has certain effects on the brain. They accept psychosomatic diseases. So the effect of mind on prana also is acceptable, even if they don't use the word prana. The idea that certain forces manipulate, which are responsible for running the different operations of our body, like digestion, circulation, nervous energy, that imbalance is created because of certain external disturbances, certain external inputs, certain mental states. So the mind affects the body and the prana has been accepted. But beyond that, where is that causal personality? The sthula sharira, the gross body, which is made of prana as well, the forces also come in the sthula. But the mind and the different sense organs, sense perceptions, the chitta, the subtle, the reactive part of the mind, the ego, the buddhi, the higher part of the mind, and also the chitta, the storehouse of the mind. All these four functions of the mind, they belong to the subtle body, because the subtle body is made of uh, those things. So these are ideas which take some time to accept, though we know its functions. When we tell these things, the impact of when we discuss yoga, you can't leave out any aspect of your personality. You can't say, I'll just do asanas and pranayama and I can take care of my mind. No, you have to take care of the chitta, take care of the samskaras, take care of everything that creates your personality. And that way, you deal with the subtle mind, the subtle aspect of your personality, the Sukshma Sharira. Then we have the Karana Sharira, where all our impressions, old habits are as it were solidified. So the physical manifestation of that, Swamiji says, are like channels in the brain. So there are certain channels in the brain which have been habituated to think in a particular way. So, for example, a person has been continuously brainwashed since childhood that making money is the goal and aim and ideal of your life. As long as you have that ideal in life, you will be happy. And he accepts it without any opposition or without any resistance. He accepts it because it has become a habit. His brain has been used. So you can't blame that boy or that person. The child who has been trained that way. If he has seen his father, parents, and all his peers, everybody trying to create an atmosphere that material wealth, luxury, and all these things, the pleasures of the body, they are prime, they should be taken care of. And if you want to enjoy life, you have to earn money. And the ideas, all those things have become so automatic with most of the human beings, that if you tell them yoga is another option which will help you get rid of your indiscriminate attachment to the body and the world around you, and it will give you more joy because you live on a more subtler plane. When you live in the gross plane, there is no doubt joy, but an equal amount of sorrow also comes. When you, even when a billionaire loses say half a billion pounds or dollars in one day, the amount of suffering he undergoes may be more than a person, a beggar, losing his small bag or something like that. The beggar may think, oh, I had such few possessions, even one of that is stolen. But he will be happy, he will not be so much upset because he knows he can somehow get a replacement. Whereas the billionaire who loses half of his money overnight because of some stock exchange crash, his pain may be more. So, in a way, you can't say that a person who is materially well established is happy in the mind. So, you have to take care of the subtle part of the body, mind also, subtle part of our personality, which needs its own satisfaction. So you can't say peace of mind, I can sacrifice peace of mind for all the effort I make to earn wealth. The effort and the pain and the struggle associated with the creating wealth is not a very easy thing to even earn money. People spend, they don't get time for leisure, they don't get time for sitting quietly and meditating. So that means there is lopsided development. The brain is used to ideas of earning money, earning creating wealth, enjoying the pleasures, that when somebody tells them, no, you have to take care of your mind, otherwise in later life there will be a lot of suffering, or even now you cannot handle your emotions, you cannot handle your mind, in spite of all the wealth around you, you still say you are sad, you are not able to tackle your mental problems, then the question comes, you have been neglecting your sukshma sharira, the subtle aspect. So Swamiji says these ideas, when somebody tells you yoga will help you to, at first there is resistance, because the person, he says, it is an entirely new set of thoughts and motives which have been introduced to a person who was inordinately attached to his wealth and the material things around him. So he says, why should I give up? But nobody is asking you to give up. The yogi says, know them to be temporary and take care of the higher aspects of your personality as well. If you want security in the long term, this money, all these things will not come handy when certain mental struggles are there. The person may commit suicide with all the $1 billion in his bank. So the physical resistance or the mental resistance to new thoughts, Swamiji says, is very common. So Swamiji says that is why we find that part of religion which deals with the world, the side of nature, is so widely accepted. Whereas the other part, the psychology which deals with the inner nature of man, is frequently neglected in our upbringing, in our homes, in our schools, in our syllabus, everywhere. The inner nature of man occupies a very small part of our attention, unless the parents and the teachers and the peers and everybody around that child gets that opportunity to uh, convince himself or herself that the inner nature of man is equally important as the outer nature or the physical part of nature, that part of religion, which, because religion has a double function. It doesn't say that we'll deal only with the inner nature, it deals with the external nature. That is why yama and niyama are there, how to make our actions in harmony with nature. So those thoughts are not to be neglected, but it it should be balanced with those thoughts which deal with the inner nature of man. And if we do it at a younger age, Swamiji says, the resistance will be, the physical resistance will be much less, because the brain is open to, the younger the brain, the more open it is to new ideas. Then Swamiji says that the infinite existence, the consciousness which has been caught up in this Prakriti, the plane of consciousness which we call our mind, our body, our prana system, the whole psychophysical setup which God has given, which we are born with, that is a limited plane of consciousness. Unfortunately, we think that is the entire consciousness, but we even in our limited knowledge of ourselves, our personality, we know there are certain things that happen in dream of which we do not know much. We go into deep sleep. What happens then? Who is conscious? Who is watching our dreams? Who is the person? So that plane of consciousness we have not explored. The infinite is definitely projected. The infinite consciousness is projected in our limited consciousness of, in our personality, in our mind, and we call it as my world. So my world comprises of my relatives, my friends, my school mates, my teachers, the little world around me. And if we grow, if we become more and more engaged in social contacts, then maybe our world may be slightly bigger. Then we have our social clubs, we have our country, we have our affinities towards different sports, nationalities. We may travel, and may have friends over in other countries. So all these things, we project our consciousness. We become from a local family centered person to a social person, which encompasses its your workplace, beyond the workplace, recreation, the touring that we do. So our world becomes bigger and bigger physically, but still that projection, that consciousness which allows us to appreciate nature, which allows us to, or which encourages us to travel to different places, do different jobs, try so much of new things. Because there are some people who are happy with the status quo. They just don't want to leave their village or town. They are happy following a particular routine for years and years together. There are such people. But there are some people who are more adventurous. They want to enjoy that consciousness. They feel it is they're suffocated within their own family, and so they want to expand their consciousness and embrace more and more people. So, but still, we are part of the world. But there is another world, another consciousness, the infinite beyond. The religion has to deal with both. What happens now? The consciousness which is in this world, we understand. We understand the power structure, we understand the social systems, we understand our likes, dislikes, food, travel, and all those things we understand. We have a vast world of ourselves, and we are so engrossed that we don't deal with another part of our consciousness, which is our dream state, which is our deep sleep state, which are also equally true. You can't say that I shall always be in the waking world, the world that we see around me. Suddenly that world will vanish when you sleep. And when you get a disturbed sleep, either a nightmare or even if you get a good dream, you are in a totally different consciousness, a different world. Have we exploited that? Have we explored that? Not exploited, explored that. So there is an infinite beyond the limited consciousness that, so any religion which says, oh, you should just be engaged in your duty. Some people say, I just believe in this, as if karma yoga is such a easy thing. He said, I don't believe in all this yoga and other things. I just believe in karma. I just believe in doing good. I just believe in earning money and maybe doing a little charity. He says, that is my philosophy of life, and I'm happy with that. It is okay for them, it is okay, but they should not say this is the only existence that we live. There are higher. Some people may feel suffocated with this. What is this earning the money, earning your money, and maybe doing a little charity? That doesn't satisfy them. They want higher pursuits. They want intellectual pursuits. They want to go away. They want the idea of freedom to be manifest in the day-to-day things. They want an element of uncertainty. Some people love uncertainty. Like when you are traveling on a straight river, suddenly the river turns, you are not able to see the beyond, what is there on the other side. That curiosity will, the spirit of adventure will take you forward. So also there are so many things in nature which one can explore, and people who love to do that, they they are in search of certain things, certain consciousness which is beyond their normal worldly plane of consciousness. So the infinite, which has become finite in our little world of ours, every human being makes an effort to increase that consciousness, because that is the nature of a human being. He cannot be confined to the cage of time, space, and causation. Time, space, and causation will make him limited. Though he may travel all over the world, he will enjoy the world only through his five senses and five karmendriyas. Beyond that, he can't enjoy. But there are some people who say, is there anything beyond this space, time, and causation? Does new worlds open to you? Do new worlds open to you when you meditate? When you enter a totally different unfamiliar territory, when you concentrate on your mind, the functions of the mind, you discover there's an entirely different world which you have never explored, the world of visions. Why do you think Sri Ramakrishna used to say that I see God more intensely than I see you? He would see Narendra, he saw all the devotees and all the people around him. The world was real for him, at least when he interacted with them. But for him, there was another world which we people don't explore, the world of the Divine Mother, the world of gods and goddesses who used to give him intuitive experiences. It's not just spiritual people, other people also have that. They will find them not very careless about their physical needs, but highly involved in certain thoughts which reveal new things to them. The mental universe, the intuitive universe opens to them. The poets, the great nature poets, they try to see something beyond. They are not satisfied with the limited consciousness they have. They won't see the running brooks or the trees and the plants the way ordinary biologists may see. They want to see something beyond. They want to see poetry behind all these things, behind God's creation. They come up with intuitive poems. They come up with intuitive ideas. They the That part of religion which deals with the infinite beyond comes as entirely new. If you tell some people of the different experiences, they say we are least bothered. We don't want. This yoga may offer, but it's an uncertain thing. We don't want to go into uncertain territory because we do not know whether those experiences are genuine, whether people who claim to have seen such things experience the higher aspects of our personality, whether they are saying the truth. So that faith to that for that faith to come, to believe that God and Mammon, the importance of the spirit is far, far more than the importance of the world. So that idea, to get convinced that spirit is always superior to matter and spirit should control matter, not matter control the spirit, as all the prophets have been saying. So we take these prophets, um, um, we take their word. We take their word because we have not experienced. If Sri Ramakrishna says there is God, Naren said, I have not seen him. So how can I accept what you say is true? Can you show him to me? So that was the real scientific spirit or the yearning, is if there is a world beyond, and if your yoga claims to show that world or that world can be experienced, then can we too experience? Patanjali says yes. So the new channels which are formed in the brain as a result of these new possibilities, human possibilities. Swami Ranganathan used to give a beautiful scientific term to this. He says it is the science of human possibilities. He in fact wrote many articles on that, the science of human possibilities. Now, when you tell this thing, human possibilities, the word human possibilities for a materialistic, he says the science of human possibilities to earn more money, to make the mind sharp, to develop a career, or to become a powerful sportsman, or to excel in life. Many things can mean the human possibilities they think are merely physical. But then a certain people say, oh no, there is an intellectual possibility. So there are infinite possibilities which we have not explored. And for that reason, that doesn't mean these possibilities are not there. So science of human possibilities, when Swami Ranganathanji wrote a beautiful book, Vedanta, the science of human possibilities. What did he mean? He mean Vedanta offers you, yoga, Vedanta, yoga and spirituality offers you a offers you more variety to explore higher possibilities with this human personality of yours, of ours. So ordinary people, when they come to yoga, they get a lot of joy perhaps by doing asanas and pranayama because they find that their material needs, their material efficiencies have increased. Perhaps their skin has become, some people do yoga just to get a to remove the uh, creases in the skin. When you get old, you want the skin to not to lose its shine and other things. So there are ridiculous practices which allow you the diet which you do, which you uh, take, the exercises, the pranayama, these things can definitely help, because when your body functions properly, there are external signs possible, but they are not the be all and end all of yoga. So people first, they will accept these lower things. There's nothing wrong in that. But once having got good health, a good personality, physical personality, they will think, does yoga do only this? Can it not help me with my mental problems? Will it just solve my physical problems? Okay, they are solved. I have a healthy body. I have a very fit body. But Someday it is going to get old. Then what will happen to my mind? How will I control it? So to come out of the grooves of the ideas that yoga is beneficial for the physical body and the prana, then you have to come to dhyana. Now, how can one, Swamiji says, when you start doing it, there are some disturbances. Naturally, there is resistance. Even when a person is told, when somebody says that, see, I have practiced this yoga and I know there are higher possibilities. I have seen those uh, states of and the state of transformation myself and in others, and I can show them to you. In the beginning, there is resistance, as Narendranath said, told Thakur, I am not happy if you say that you have seen God. Anybody may say I have seen God or had those experiences. Can you give that experience to me? So Patanjali says how to get faith. That is discussed in the 35th verse, which is, I'll tell you the Sanskrit of that. 35th verse says, Vishayavati va pravrittir utpanna manasah sthiti nibandhini. Means the translation is those forms of concentration which result in extraordinary perception. You may say supersensuous perceptions. They encourage, they are not an end in itself. Some people see light, some people get some wonderful smell. Swamiji explains that what happens. So, Vishayavati, those forms of concentration which result in extraordinary perceptions. Perceptions are due to Vishaya, objects. Say, for example, smell. Now, you don't have any incense burning, but by yoga, there is an aura or there is a wonderful incense is created. These things are real. Though they are not the end of yoga, they encourage perseverance of the mind, because when the mind feels that because of yoga, the yoga that I am practicing, is it leading me somewhere? So that faith tends to falter. And when that faith falters, he needs such props. Not all, some of them have wonderful faith by the grace of the Guru that they just persist in their sadhana, irrespective of what results they get or not. But those are very rare exceptions to have that kind of faith. Even Swamiji did not have faith. That's why Sri Ramakrishna at the end of his life had to tell, even now are you doubting me? Because he was skeptical. Perhaps he was the representation of the modern scientific mind, which said question everything. And Sri Ramakrishna encouraged that. He said, if you have any doubts, question it, get it solved, try to understand it perfectly, and then only follow yoga if you are convinced intellectually. If it is according to reason, then only. So Patanjali doesn't ask us to follow certain dogma. He said, no, you just do the sadhana. After you die, you will go to heaven. Such things Patanjali never, or in Indian systems, they say here and now. These experiences have to be experienced here and now, otherwise it has no value. If you promise somebody that you will get these experiences after you die, as some of the religions do, they say you sacrifice your life, you just obey the dogma, obey the instructions, injunctions, and you can be rest assured that your entire life, the reward that you will get, you will get in heaven. So promising something in heaven when you are suffering here, when you are not able to solve your problems here, not in the physical sense, but in a holistic sense, that is a wrong promise. But Patanjali says that doesn't mean that these experiences do not encourage a person to go forward. If you see some such visions without getting stuck, if you go forward. So Vishayavati va pravrutti utpanna. Pravrutti means by your activities, by your sadhana, by your japa and all those things. Manasa sthiti nibandhini, which encourage the mind, the perseverance of the mind. The mind has a tendency to doubt everything. If things don't happen the way we want, we get disgusted, we get upset, we get depressed. He said, oh, yoga is not helping me. They will do a little. That's why Holy Mother is to say they just do a few mantras and they expect the Lord, they expect visions, they expect experiences. But is it such a joke to get these experiences? One has to practice. So, most of us are naturally skeptical. Despite our affirmed beliefs, our dogmas and beliefs, which we may call it a belief, but till it is scientifically proved, it is just a dogma. So Swamiji says the first step is to clear all the cobwebs in the brain, establish a thing rationally, and then believe in it, and then wait for the experience to come. If the texts, somewhere you have to have faith, we have to believe in the scriptures. That is why that preliminary belief based on a tradition, because many, the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, the Bible, all these books are coming down, and many saints have been produced and they have had these experiences. So we can't deny the uh, authenticity of these things. So he says we need to be reassured, but still Patanjali says don't go by Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. You may read all the Yoga Sutras and have tremendous belief in Patanjali, but if you don't have a single experience, what is mentioned in the book, anybody will be discouraged. So he says, we need to be reassured that the powers of our mind over matter really exist, that the subtle is more powerful, the spirit is more powerful than matter. And but the conditions we have to fulfill. We can't just demonstrate it. You can't just go and tell a yogi, show me. You don't expect him to do a miracle and show that this subtle is more powerful than the gross. So these powers or these experiences are nothing but control, mastery over the gross things by the subtle mind. But it takes a lot of time, and it may not manifest as miracles or all those things. There are strict laboratory conditions, as you have certain conditions have to be fulfilled to produce the result of an experiment. You have to have a particular proportion of chemicals to be mixed. Then only you get a scientific miracle. You have to combine H to twice the amount of hydrogen and oxygen, and certain conditions are necessary to combine them to produce water. Chemically or mathematically, you can say, or the formula is there, H2O. But to take it to the laboratory and prove it, you require certain laboratory conditions. These are the conditions behind the experiment. So also, when we deal these documented experiments, which yogis say you do, we do some pranayama, we do some asana, and then say, oh, there's no result. Oh, this is a useless yoga. Then we take up another yoga. There's so many countless yoga systems here where gurus are there by the thousands. They do not belong to any tradition. Perhaps they don't have any experience themselves, but they still claim that you will get because this text is saying. No doubt the text may be valuable, but what that text is saying, have you experienced it? Patanjali says, don't believe people, just try to experience these things yourself. Anybody who says that you can't experience it, but I have experienced it, so just listen to me. Don't believe that person. So, if we have to create those conditions for the spiritual yoga experiments to be made, and there are strict regulations, strict, uh, you may say, milestones, which Patanjali points out. He says these extraordinary perceptions will be the first to come. If you have studied the subject, I mean, uh, telepathy, pre-recognition or intuition, the phenomena of medium shape, there are so many things passing in the name of yoga. Though they are not false, Patanjali does not encourage them, but he says they have only relative value. Because when you see certain miraculous things happening by the power of yoga, it's nothing miraculous, it is a scientific method, a scientific yogic procedure, following which you develop certain things. But still, they have not happened to us. Until they do, the mind harbors this germ of doubt. The mind keeps on doubting. Oh, that yogi has said, my guru has said, so many people have said, but should I just take them? Will I not get a few experiences? If you see the gospel, every person seems to be asking, can we see God? Can we experience God? Can we love God? So all these things they think are unique privilege of saints and people like Sri Ramakrishna. They think we are worldly people. Can we get it? Sri Ramakrishna had to answer if it is possible for me, it is possible for you. Only thing, you have to enter my laboratory, fulfill the conditions which the scriptures say you have to fulfill. Then you get those experiences. So Patanjali mentions a few experiences, extraordinary perceptions. We are told that if a man concentrates on the tip of his nose, Swamiji says that. Swamiji very clearly says, if you concentrate on the tip of the nose, Swamiji's, I'm just reading from some portions of the commentary of Swamiji. In dharana, when you do, after pratyahara comes dharana, and you focus on certain material objects. If the mind becomes concentrated, for example, Swamiji says, on the tip of the nose, there are some people, one begins to get wonderful smells. After a few days, after a few months, regular practice, wonderful perfumes. Then you may feel that there's no perfume around, but I am getting a strange kind of perfume or such strange kind of smell, because the mind has become so subtle that it can, from the infinite storehouse of cosmic perfumes and cosmic smells, it can directly come in touch with these things. So that is just smell. Then if the mind is concentrated on at the root of the tongue, the root of the tongue, one begins to hear sounds. Now these are what yogis have observed. They have practiced this. Unless we practice that, we can't. But these sounds are not the end all and be all of spiritual life. If we think that once we do all these concentrations, and that is the goal of life, once we start hearing sounds and then we start boasting, oh, I can hear sounds, I can smell perfumes, I can see some light. There are people who are obsessed with this. They see some light. See, for the tip of the tongue, one begins to taste wonderful flavors. If on the middle of the tongue, one feels as if one were coming in contact with something. So if one concentrates the mind on the palate of the mouth, one begins to see peculiar things. Visions start coming. So Patanjali says, you try to focus or do dharana on these gross objects like your mouth, like your tongue, and then you will see certain things, smell certain things. Do dharana on the nose, because that sense organ becomes so intense, or it can catch some of the most subtle vibrations. So also the dog, for example, he can hear sounds, he can smell certain things which human beings can't, because of their the sense organ of smell is so focused. Their entire mind is in that. So when the dogs which sniff certain substances, they are given to sniff that substance once, and then wherever that substance is there, even a trace of that substance is there, they will smell. So that these things are not something unique. In animal world, we see the subtle sense perceptions will come. But Swamiji says, if it serves to strengthen your faith, then it is good. So if a man in whose mind is disturbed, he is not able to have faith, either faith in his guru, or then his doubts will be set at rest, while after a little practice these things come to him, and then he will persevere. That is the meaning of this. So all the supernormal sense of touch, supernormal sense of color, the middle of the tongue, and if on the root of the tongue we get supernormal sense of hearing, we hear strange sounds like the peal of a bell from a distance, the gongs, and many things people hear. Swamiji says such powers are of no value in themselves, but at least they serve one purpose. They explain to us there is an infinite capacity of the mind. If it can smell certain things which are not around you, if it can hear sounds which are not present right now, in a gross way, if all these subtle experiences come, they will serve the purpose of showing that the mind can do wonderful things. The infinite capacity of the human mind to express the human possibilities, the different possibilities. So, just as in a gymnasium, we try to train a human body to perform stupendous feats, things which we normally can't do. We can lift 120, 130 kgs if a proper training and technique is followed. So all these acrobatic tricks and all the different exercises, the physical discipline, if it can discipline the physical body, the mind also can be trained in a similar way in yoga to get all these extraordinary perceptions. So breaking the ordinary, the barriers which are imposed on us by ordinary sense perception, we press forward, we go, we are determined to get these experiences ourselves. And that gives us some kind of inner knowledge or inner experience, that faith in the inner world. When you say meditate in the heart, what do you mean? We don't meditate in the physical heart. We have to meditate in the inner space, which is full of divine light. Now, these things can be verbally told to you, but if I close my eyes, I neither see light, neither see the inner heart or all those things. But if you go on persisting, a day will come when suddenly you will start see a vision. You can see the lotus of the heart blooming. Then it becomes easy to focus your mind. Then it becomes easy to focus your Ishta. The Ishta was not appearing till now. The moment you saw the picture, you could see him, but the moment you closed your eyes, the Ishta vanished. Then there is a big struggle. But when you attain more and more concentration, suddenly the Ishta will appear on the lotus. These are experiences of yogis, so they cannot be denied. They saw their own Ishta or the object which they meditate upon as sitting on the lotus. Lotus, somehow, these are not just the physical lotuses, these are the nerves which get activated as a result of this concentration. The mental strength and the faith which we get, that is more important. These experiences may vary from person to person, but one thing is common: whether the experiencer is a student or an advanced disciple, the faith has to increase. That is its only value. To unite ourselves with the Purusha, the highest form of consciousness, giving up this all petty, though they are petty, they are important, but they are still petty because compared to the supreme and pure consciousness, these small experiences, other than more than when we cross the ordinary sense barrier, we see wonderful things, smell wonderful things, then we hear wonderful sounds. All these things, when they happen, you understand that the subtle is more powerful than the gross. So that is the first step. Now we come to the verse number 36. Vishokava Jyotishmati. So concentration, this is one way. He says, by hook or crook, all this 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, all the verses are given by Patanjali as alternate methods. You meditate on the experiences you had. You can even meditate on dream, as you will see in the next verse. But here he says, Vishokava Jyotishmati. So the first way of concentration is to meditate on the visions or the little experiences we may or may have. Many people come and tell us they saw this. It's fine. You use it as a experience. If it is coming very often and you are feeling great joy, it's not just an hallucination, then hold on to that vision or the memory of that vision. Say, oh, I had seen that light. What was the beautiful light that I saw? What is the beautiful smell that I got? I hope I get it again. So that can be used for concentration, but the focus should be on concentrating the mind more and more, not on the smell itself, not on the sight that you see itself. All those things will come and go, but at least it will increase your faith. So concentration also may be attained by fixing the mind upon the inner light. which is beyond sorrow. Vishoka means which is beyond sorrow. Shoka means sorrow. Vishoka means one who is beyond sorrow or without sorrow. So one who has seen that light, if one enjoys the light, the luminous form of the Ishta, he is known as Jyotishmati. Jyotishmati means one full of light. So when you say your Ishta is a illumined person sitting there as a person, as a being which is full of light, the light of consciousness. It is not the physical light, but it is a good idea to meditate on it as a physical light to begin with, so that the idea of light takes you to the idea of consciousness, pure consciousness. So he is the infinite Sat, Cheta and Ananda, the joyful spirit, who is beyond all sorrow, who can take us beyond sorrow. So the ancient yogis, they believed that there was a center of spiritual consciousness in the heart, which they called is that Hridaya Kamala, or lotus of the heart. So somehow it has been associated with the awakened, the lotus flower whose drooping petals suddenly become that drooping from drooping position, they come into a fully blown lotus shape. So that means the nervous energy which was going down because of gravity, the Apana Vayu, as I said, the Udana Vayu has to balance. It is the upward force that helps the rise of Kundalini and the rise of the force which would have normally gone down. So the purpose of Apana Vayu is to throw out, as I said, the things which are not needed in the body, to throw them out of the body. So that force is gravitational force. But to balance the prana, apana, there is a udana vayu which is responsible for upward gravitation. So upward means anti-gravitation. Gravity will take things down. So the mind also has a tendency to become tamasic. To make it sattvic, then you have to develop that udana vayu. So the yogis claim that lotus, the drooping lotus, suddenly when you meditate, the negativity which is associated with the tamas, with tamasic attitude, physically, mentally, we become tamasic and we become bored, we become depressed. Then the sign of a lotus blooming brings back joy. You go beyond sorrow. And since those who saw it, the yogis who saw this actually saw it, they were filled with the extraordinary sense of peace and joy. So they were just meditating, suddenly, and trying to imagine a lotus with the drooped petals, but suddenly the petals just turn upward. And that is when the Kundalini, or the nervous energy which is motivated by this, which is powered by the Udana Vayu, they allow the personality to enjoy, or that Ishta, the glowing image, the glowing not in the sense of light, the consciously glowing image, the image full of consciousness, the light of consciousness, that glowing image will be very prominent in one's vision. As he said, when you meditate on the palate, when all this pranayama and the repetition of the japa purifies the entire mouth, though you may not be repeating loudly, if you see, even the most subtle vibration uses the mouth. Swamiji says, so when you passes through the root of the mouth to the palate, you see visions. When it goes to the center, when you go to the tip of the tongue, there are so many different parts of the tongue. When the mantra flows over it, it enables the lotus to bloom. So the Kaivalya Upanishad says, those who struggle and aspire may enter there, retire into solitude. Seat yourself on a clean spot in an erect posture, because if the spine is not erect, then it becomes difficult for the Kundalini to rise. It is a tendency to scatter. So select yourself a clean spot. Gita also says, take up a spot which is neither too low or neither too high. It should be of interest. That's why under the tree there normally a platform would be created so that people don't have to sit on the ground. It should be elevated, but it should not be very high as well. So it should be a clean spot where insects and others don't disturb you. Plus, you get the solitude because you are moved to a forest or some quiet place under a tree. But another thing which you have to follow, the tree may or may not be there. You can do it in the room also. But the head and neck and the chest, they should all, the spinal cord should be in a straight line. And then one has to control the sense organs, not allow the perceptions to take place and shake the lake of the mind. The mind, with great difficulty with concentration, the waves have become less and less. But if you don't control the sense organs, they'll bombard you and agitate the mind. There, without agitation, if you bow down to your guru or the teacher, that's why we first are asked to meditate on the guru, which will calm down our mind a little bit, because we have seen the guru in physically. We may not have seen Ishta. We might have seen him only in a photograph or in a vision. But we have to imagine that the Ishta is sitting on the lotus of the heart. But before that, we are supposed to meditate on the guru, because the guru, we can get a fairly good picture of our guru because we have seen him with in 3 dimension, with in flesh and blood. Whereas the Ishta, we have to use a very strong sense of imagination till, of course, the Ishta appears to us, like the Ishta Divine Mother appeared to Sri Ramakrishna. So we have to enter, bowing down to our own teacher, our guru, in the lotus of the heart. When you bring in the Ishta there, in the lotus of the heart, then the blissful presence, the pure, infinite, blissful presence of Brahman, or who is our Ishta, comes. Then there is no need for guru, because the guru has to be merged in the Ishta. That is what meditation does. And in the Chandogya Upanishad also we read that within the city of Brahman, which is the body, they call Brahman as this body is important, not because it has sense organs, it can enjoy the world outside, because this body also is the seat of Brahman. If Brahman is everywhere, will he not be in the heart? But he can be realized within the heart. There is, the city of Brahman is vast. He is all pervading. But within the heart, there is a little house. That is what Chandogya Upanishad says. This house has the shape of a lotus. So that is how these wonderful visions came to these yogis. And Patanjali says, and within it dwells that which is to be sought for, inquired about, and realized. So 3 things it has to be sought for. We have to so seek for our Ishta. We will miss seeing him, but we have to again and again see him, then meditate on him, inquire about him, think about him, do Lila Chintan of him, and see that he is focused all the time in the lotus of the heart. And finally, we have to realize him. See him as a glowing or a blissful image full of light. So, that which dwells within this little house or lotus of the heart, that must be sought after, inquired, and then realized. So also, we can extend that meditation to the entire cosmos. We'll discuss about it later. I'll take up some questions now. We're almost 1 hour is over. So let me see if in the chat there are some questions. Now this question is not connected to today's class, but anyway, I'll just, there are only 2 questions. Can you explain how karma yoga leads to Chitta Shuddhi? It is very, very simple. Karma yoga presupposes that you create karma yoga. Actually, what does karma yoga do? You do karma without any attachment. So you are actually working out. The chitta has so many old habits. You have performed, say, certain karmas, thousands of varieties of karmas with bad intentions, say, with greed, with jealousy, with envy. Now those emotions are attached to that karma which you have done. The same karma can be done with good emotions. So it is the quality of the emotions that decide the nature of the samskara. So if something has been done, the same karma, see for example, a person kills another person for money, he is committing a crime. But if the same person fights a battle for a just cause and he defends his country, or maybe he kills another person in a battlefield, he is not punished, he is glorified because the motive is different. So also our karma yoga tells us that whenever any motive is attached, a samskara is created, good or bad. So bad karma has been accumulated in the chitta, that has given us bad tendencies. So chitta shuddhi means counteracting those bad karmas by doing good karma with a good motive, or doing motiveless action. That is still better. Doing with good motive, after a certain time you will realize that even good motive can create some punya and positive karma. But that is not what we aspire for. Once the negative is destroyed by the positive karma, then you have to still go on doing karma without any attachment. Anasakti yoga, as it is known. That is the central message of the Gita. Do everything. Krishna was constantly doing work. He had absolutely no motive, as he told Arjuna. Arjuna had a motive, all the Pandavas had a motive, and that is why they suffered, because they lost their children. So many things happened in the war. Whereas Krishna, with or without war, he was the same. He was the one who fought for peace. He was the one who said, why can't you give them 5 villages? They are just asking for 5 villages because to save their face. And he said, no, I'm not going to give an inch of that land. So Krishna knew that this person is bound by his prakriti, and he will do that in spite of the jealousy, anger, and all those things. Emotions have made up his samskaras, the karma. So chitta shuddhi can be, and Krishna in his life he showed that continuously was doing karma. Of course, he did not need chitta shuddhi, but he showed us the way that constantly doing karma without getting attached to anybody or anything, that ultimately will lead to chitta shuddhi. And the last question I will answer. Somehow one needs to create anti-gravitational divine force which will raise to the upper plane of divinity. Is it so? It's not a question of upper or lower. The different pranas have different functions. Even the gravitational force is necessary to throw out the rubbish which is accumulated in the body, is a function of prakriti. It is doing a good thing, otherwise your body will not last long. It has to throw out whatever nutrition is taken up by the body, assimilated in the blood. The rest of it is poison. It has to be thrown out. So also you throw out the through your the urinary system, we throw out certain harmful salts, certain harmful things. There are many harmful things in liquid form. So whether it is liquid or solid, we have to throw out the waste, things which have been absorbed, but now they are poisonous, they have to be thrown out. So apana vayu is not bad. Apana vayu is necessary, but its function, because of the more material you are, the more apana vayu, you gravitate, you consume more food, then the apana vayu has to do more work. It has to digest more food, then it results in fat, so many diseases, and then it has to, the more you consume, if you consume more than what your body really needs, the calories the body needs, the apana vayu is strained. So there is if you might have seen, if a person consumes a lot of food, he feels so lazy, he feels tamasic, because the gravitational force has increased. The apana vayu is pushing things down and he wants to get up, he doesn't feel light. Whereas if you fast, if people who are used to fasting, they have a feeling of lightness. They just immediately get up. They are easy to get up. Whereas a person who is very heavy, he finds it difficult even to get up because the gravitational force is more. So your question that whether the force, upward force is desirable or not. Even for physical well-being it is required. But here Apana Vayu is supposed to, the divine force has nothing, the consciousness has nothing to do with downward, upward, side. It is everywhere. The divine consciousness, when you meditate, you don't have to bother about the prana. They will do their own functions. I'm talking of the problems that we face in the world. To some extent, they can be controlled by the prana. That's why we do pranayama, to increase the prana, the breathing, so that more energy is generated. The Udana Vayu helps you to just have a light feeling, to do sadhana, to sit for long hours, to do all those things. Otherwise, you will feel like lying down after half an hour of japa. So that balance of Vayu is required. It's not that you have to counteract, raise it to raise that Apana Vayu. Apana Vayu does its function by throwing out the waste. But if it throws out certain important things which are not supposed to be thrown, that is why the idea of brahmacharya and celibacy is there. We are just conserving certain important things which are not meant to be thrown. It has to be used judiciously. So that is not the function of Apana Vayu, but you are abusing that Apana Vayu, and as a result, we find that there is a depletion of the prana in a person. That is why brahmacharya is insisted upon, celibacy is insisted upon only because of that. The conservation or conversion of the energy which would have been thrown out of the body by Apana Vayu, that has to be converted into ojas, and that energy comes very useful when you want to practice spirituality. That is why they insist, every religion, every religious system, people think, why are they insisting on celibacy? It's a purely scientific reason why celibacy is important for spiritual growth. Otherwise, you will feel depressed, you'll feel that something has been gravitating in your life which ought to have taken an upward direction and converted into something useful. It is very simple. Sri Ramakrishna used to give the example of water. When you are watering a field, he says if there are many rat holes, no matter how much water you pour there, it will all go through those rat holes, and nothing will be left for the harvest, for the field. So he gave an example trying to show the importance of brahmacharya or celibacy in life. So that is why create an anti-gravitational force. One has to conserve energy. That is one way. And allow Apana Vayu or the gravitational energy to do its job of throwing out unnecessary things from the body. There's no harm in that. That will take place whether we want it or not. And the more it does, it's better. We don't need waste to be accumulated in our body. But as I said, the upward force has to be voluntarily or willingly created. It's not just pranayama that will help. Pranayama will definitely assist the rise of the Udana Vayu, the rise of the Kundalini, the rise of the Ojas, but there should be certain other Vayus also which come, Samana, which is digestion, the Vyana, that is the nervous energy. Now that nervous energy also has a tendency to gravitate. The whole nervous energy, if is used in the lower part of our body, the three chakras below the heart, that's why they say meditate on the heart chakra. The lower two chakras are chakras, no doubt. They have their function, but they are not so important. They are important in certain functions of Prakriti. They help us to digest. The stomach chakra, the Swadhisthana, the Manipura, and the Muladhara. They have their own functions, biological functions. But those chakras are not so important for yoga, because the yogic journey starts when the nervous energy and the entire Vayu or the prana is focused on the heart center. That is why we begin with the heart center and go up. Okay. So that is the idea. I mean, your question was how to create an anti-grave. This is the only way, through meditation and also simultaneously controlling the mind and the senses and practice of brahmacharya. Okay, so I'll take your leave today. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
Namaste. Thank you, Maharaj.
Namaste. Thank you.
Namaste. Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you, Maharaj.